Good morning, everyone. Welcome to those here in our sanctuary, those on Zoom, or those watching on YouTube. My name is Norm Hroffger, and I'm the proud minister of this congregation, the Universalist Unitarian Church of Halifax, founded in 1837. Jessica Friesen is our music director. Marie-Claude Leroux is our director of religious exploration. John Piccolo is our volunteer director and technician. And this morning, and Paige Walkerchuk is our service assistant this morning. Thank you all. This morning we're continuing to explore the theme of the month of January, imagination. And during the service today, the chat function will be open, and I invite you to extend your hospitality by saying hello to anyone who you don't recognize, or you may choose to leave a message for us so that we could contact you later. If you aren't already receiving notifications from our church and you would like to receive updates on our activities and our services, you can do so by emailing me at minister@uuch.ca. Before we proceed, I have several announcements. The order of service for today was sent out over UU Info on Saturday evening, and it contains more detail on the following. I'm just going to touch on a few things. Every Thursday evening at 7 p.m., we have a Zoom call for anyone interested in joining, a way of breaking out of COVID isolation. We started doing something a little different. I'm going to be guiding the session a little bit, and the first half of the session will be for social interaction, getting just to talk with each other, and then the second half of the session, a little bit of help for the minister. I'll be talking about the upcoming service, and the subject of the upcoming service, and inviting ideas that might help us in planning that service. For next Sunday, the service is Imagining Future Possibilities for the Universalist Unitarian Church of Halifax. I'll be doing that jointly with Troy Saunier. The details, again, are in the order of service. Again, we're doing a hybrid service, so you're welcome to come back into the sanctuary, but you're invited to please contact Margaret Galbraith in advance so that we can manage the logistics. Unfortunately, the relaunch of our Soulful Sundown series has been postponed for 1 month, from January 30th to February 27th. There are a number of team meetings coming up this week. The first I want to mention is Dismantling Racism Task Force. That's on the fourth Tuesday of each month. I have a little bit more to say about that during the service. And the membership team meeting is the fourth Thursday of each month at 7:30 p.m. And Pam Berman is the chair of that task team. Newsletter deadline, Tuesday, January 26th. And the board was, in our meeting this month, was addressing our response to the global climate crisis. So at that January meeting of the board, the following motion was passed. In the light of the extreme seriousness of the changing climate affecting all aspects of environmental, atmospheric, oceans, earth, and all life thereon, and in light of the seventh principle, which we all affirm, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part, the Board of UUCH recognizes the urgency of the climate crisis and encourages the congregation to act in whatever way they can to mitigate the situation. As a first step, we're planning to start we're planning to start a monthly meeting online for members and friends of the congregation who would like to learn more about how we can be part of the solution. So watch for more details on that monthly meeting. And now, we're at the end of the announcements. Jessica will present our Prelude, a perfect introduction to a service on imagining a better future. Scott Wood is a participant in our Truth, Healing, and Reconciliation team that meets on the first Friday of each month. And I believe Scott has a message for us this morning. Over to you, Scott.
Thank you, Norm, and good morning, everyone. Whenever we gather as a Universalist Unitarian Church community, we acknowledge that we are meeting on the unceded ancestral lands of Mi'kma'ki, the land of the Micmac. Our Truth, Healing, and Reconciliation program seeks to understand how settlers in this land, even today, have betrayed and deeply wounded the first peoples of this land through the injustices of broken promises, discrimination, and violence. We seek ways to heal these wounds and to live in right relationship with one another. While we seek a path forward as a UUCH community, we also act as individuals in all aspects of our lives: family, social circles, community organizations, political governance, and even hobbies, to advance healing and reconciliation between Indigenous peoples and the settler community. Just over 30 years ago, as a member of the Dalhousie University faculty, I had the great privilege of serving on President Howard Clark's task force on access for Black and Native people at Dalhousie. The task force was led by the law school's Wayne McKay and included 3 of us from the university and 3 representatives from the Black and Native communities. Our report on breaking barriers was submitted in mid-September 1989 and has formed a template for creating policies and programs that opened up educational opportunities for Black and Native people at Dalhousie. These have included, in addition to improved inclusion at all levels of the institution, special programs in law and medicine and in faculty recruitment. Much has been accomplished. However, we recognize there is always more work to be done. Thus, we must continue the truth, healing, and reconciliation process at church and in all aspects of our life. I will let Wayne McKay conclude with challenging words from his poem included in the preface to Breaking Barriers. Racism to whites is only a Racism to whites is only a word, acquiring an eloquence on Black and Native tongues, choosing within a sea of desperation the courage to dream about a future where the splendor of difference evokes the incredible beauty of being human. Thank you.
And thank you, Scott. And now is the time in our service when we would, if we were here in person, be passing the collection plate. I invite Paige Walker-Chell with the message this morning.
Good morning, everyone. All right. We have a message from the Board of Directors here. The UUCH community continues to be loving and generous as the pandemic stretches on. Many thanks to all those who kept our financial house in good order in 2020. Your giving is so appreciated. Our pledge drive was a little short of our goal, but we will still move staff salaries in 2021 towards our goal of a living wage. We continue to offer our Saturday brunch, bag lunch, and stock the food bank thanks to your generosity. Those 2 programs will need your additional support this year. Going forward, we know we can continue to count on you. If you would like to make a donation at any time, you can do so by e-transfer to treasurer@uuch.ca. If you prefer to do this by check, please send it to the church address. With gratitude from your Board of Directors.
So now as we cross the metaphorical threshold into our service together, I invite Paige to read the chalice lighting words while Alan Clark will come forward and light the chalice here in our sanctuary. Paige, over to you.
Thank you, Norm. As we light this chalice and begin this service, let us sing the magic of imagination by which we know one another and learn the lives of eras gone by. Let us sing the magic of creation by which we build the world of our soul and teach its wisdom to others, young and old. Come now into this space with singing and with magic in your fingertips and touch this world with life. And that was from the writing of Susan L. Van Dresser.
Thank you, Paige and Ellen. Our opening hymn this morning will be familiar to you all. Although it's about war and not policing, I think it resonates with the theme for the service today. Jessica?
Today we're going to be singing number 162, Gonna Lay Down My Sword and Shield. The words, like always, will be up on your screen. Please join me. Gonna lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. Gonna lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside. Gonna study the war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Gonna lay down my burden. Gonna lay down my burden down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. Gonna lay down my burden down by the riverside. Gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Gonna shake hands around the world. Gonna shake hands around the world. Everywhere I roam, everywhere I roam, everywhere I roam. Gonna shake hands around the world. Everywhere I roam. Gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more. I ain't gonna study war no more. Ain't gonna study war no more.
Thank you. Oh, I wish we had 100 people in here. And now as we address the theme of imagination, Marie-Claude has a challenge for you. Over to you, Marie-Claude.
Good morning, everyone. Have you ever tried to solve the 9-dot puzzle? There are 9 dots arranged in a 3x3 grid, and the challenge is to connect all 9 dots in 4 straight lines or fewer, without lifting your pencil from the paper or retracing your path. Now let's consider how you would solve this puzzle. And let's try it together. Well, we knew that wouldn't work. Let's try crisscross pattern. No, that doesn't work either. Let's try a few more. Maybe try starting in the center. No, none of these work either. Now, if one of the constraints were relaxed, we could solve this puzzle, like using 5 lines, or if you could pick up your pencil. Maybe it isn't even possible to solve the puzzle. Or maybe the problem isn't the constraints we were given, but an imaginary constraint. How many of us were staying inside this imaginary box when trying to solve the puzzle? How many of us impose this constraint on ourselves? With this imagined constraint, there's just no legitimate solution in that box. The only solutions to this puzzle are found once we give ourselves license to extend the lines outside the imaginary box that we were thinking in. Once you do that, creative solutions can be found. This is a commonly used solution. Or you can extend those lines even further outside the box. There are other creative ways to solve this puzzle. Here's one that would have never occurred to me, using only one straight line. Now, in this case, the line is so long that it circles the Earth twice, but it is straight nonetheless and does solve the puzzle successfully. So perhaps the lesson of the 9-dot problem is not so much to think outside the box, but rather consider that the box was always imagined, and that when it comes to truly creative problem solving, there is no box.
Thank you, Marie-Claude. So Jessica will assist me now as we take this special time to reflect on our joys and sorrows. This is a sacred time in our service, a time that we set apart to honor the many joys and the many sorrows that you, the congregation, are living, and to acknowledge the mutual support of our community. Today, as we usually do, I'll ask Jessica to light one candle for all those who are here with us or in our thoughts, who are struggling mentally, physically, financially, or emotionally. And a second candle for all the joys that are here in the room or with you at home, the big joys that come along only infrequently, and the little joys that we are blessed with every day if we have eyes to see them. And Jessica will light a candle once again for the members and friends of our community who are shut in long-term care. A candle for John Patterson and Marie Davis and Arisha Cox and Ann Wood and Norm Sable. Each week, I invite anyone with a joy or a sorrow to share at this time to relay their thoughts to me by email. So I was explaining that I've been speaking with Mary Ellen yesterday, and she told me that, as we know, Peter is at home, but in the care of palliative services. Peter is sleeping most of the time, but he's comfortable, and of course, he's in constant company of Mary Ellen, who has assisting caregivers with her. So I think we lit a candle already. Thank you. Mary Ellen also asked me to light another candle for her older brother, George Edwards, who's undergoing surgery. Although the surgery is routine, and given his age, it makes it a serious concern. So a second candle for George Edwards. And I want to light a candle for our wonderful chair of our caregiving committee, who right now needs some care from all of us. She's recovering from recent knee surgery, but she's been feeling very weak and tired and still in pain. So this is for Sylvia Robinson. Later, when we start the live streaming on YouTube and before the coffee hour begins, I'll invite anyone else to share a joy or a sorrow if they would like to do so. And now, Jessica will present our reflective hymn.
This is a new piece called When Will the Fighting Cease? When will we live in peace? When our love breaks boundaries. Please sing along with me. When will the fighting cease? When will we live in peace? When our love breaks boundaries. When will the fighting cease? When will we live in peace? When our love breaks
May the joys and sorrows, those acknowledged here this morning and those held in the sanctuaries, silent sanctuaries of our heart, weave us together in the interdependent fabric that is our community. And now Paige has a reading for us from Walter Brueggemann. Brueggemann is an important figure in modern progressive Christianity. He's in his 90s now, I believe. His work is often focused on the Hebrew prophetic tradition, and he argues that the church must provide a counter-narrative to the dominant forces of consumerism, militarism, and nationalism. Sometimes when we think about big ideas like radically rethinking the idea of policing, we get bogged down in the details. When that happens, this message from Walter Brueggemann might help.
Thank you, Norm. The language in this is a little bit complicated, perhaps, so hopefully I read it in a way that makes sense to everyone listening. So this is called the prophetic imagination. The prophet engages in futuring fantasy. The prophet does not ask if the vision can be implemented, for questions of implementation are of no consequence until the vision can be imagined. The imagination must come before the implementation. Our culture is competent to implement almost anything and to imagine almost nothing. The same royal consciousness that makes it possible to implement anything and everything is the one that shrinks imagination, because imagination is a danger. Thus, every totalitarian regime is frightened of the artist. It is the vocation of the prophet to keep alive the ministry of imagination, to keep on conjuring and proposing future alternatives to the single one the king wants to urge as the only thinkable one. Thank you.
Thank you, Paige. It's the vocation of the prophet to keep alive the ministry of imagination, to keep on conjuring and proposing futures alternative to the single one the king wants to urge us as the only thinkable one. That reading and Marie-Claude's Time for Children of All Ages about thinking outside the box set the perfect frame for our discussion this morning, because we're going to be talking about reimagining the police. The catchphrase now is defunding the police. And we immediately put a box around that. So this morning I want to encourage you to think about this concept by considering how it relates to our theme for this month, imagination. Defunding the police is a controversial idea, to say the least. And just using that phrase early in my comments this morning probably sets up a bit of a barrier, maybe a bit of a box. A bit of a barrier to really understanding our imagination and using our imagination, just because that phrase itself is controversial. Defining what is meant by defunding the police is a challenge, and we'll touch on that later in the comments. But for now, I'd like you to think in terms of shifting resources from crime prevention based on intimidation, to crime prevention based on systems of community support. Nothing I will say this morning should be interpreted as criticisms of police officers. The problem here, to the extent that it exists, is systematic. Our police are first and foremost tasked with preventing crime through intimidation and threat of punishment. When I wrote those words, I had to go back and see, did I really mean that? But we obey speed limits for the most part to avoid a fine. We obey the laws to avoid punishment. And it's the job of the police to use intimidation and threat of punishment to keep us all in line. But they're also often the first to be called to deal with anyone who's slightly out of line, whether that's due to mental illness, homelessness, poverty, intoxication, a barking dog, or a noisy neighbor. The solution is call the police. Thinking of defunding the police in the context of imagination opens up two avenues of exploration for me. The first is trying to imagine what our city would look like if we took seriously the idea of defunding the police department. For most of us, I suspect, imagining that is a real challenge. We're used to the role of police in our community. We depend on them to keep us safe, to protect our property, to preserve the peace, and to enforce the laws. Defunding the police, that's a big challenge to our imagination. The second avenue of exploration for our imagination, though, is to imagine how marginalized groups and individuals see the police and how they would view a proposal to defund the police. I don't claim to be an expert in this. I had a limited amount of time to do some research, but I came across some interesting numbers. I'll try not to bore you with the statistics, but briefly, Black Nova Scotians represent less than 3% of the population in the province. But they represent 10% of the people that we hold in prisons and jails. More than three times what you would expect. The numbers are not as badly skewed, surprisingly, for the Indigenous population. This from a recent report. Indigenous persons were overrepresented in admissions to remand in 2017 and 18. Remand meaning that you've been charged and you're being held in custody pending a further court appearance. Well, they make up 6% of the population in Nova Scotia. They account for 8% of the admissions to remand in the province. Indigenous females are overrepresented in remand admissions to a greater extent than their male counterparts. In 2017 to 18, Indigenous females represented 15% of female admissions to remand, while male Indigenous persons represented 7% of male admissions. Interestingly, Indigenous peoples were not overrepresented in admissions to sentencing or to sentence custody in 2017 and 18. The population is roughly 5%, and they accounted for about 5% of admissions to custody for sentencing. As a child, I was taught that if I needed help, I should seek out a policeman. That's not the advice that marginalized parents and those living in poverty and people of color, the Indigenous population, generally give to their children. I have maybe a trivial example here of my naivete. I remember when we first started serving Saturday brunch here at the church in our neighborhood. I happened to meet a uniformed member of the Halifax Police who regularly patrolled in our neighborhood, usually from a police car. In fact, in reflection, I can't remember when I've seen a policeman walking down the street here in front of the church. In any case, this man was friendly and interested in the community, and I suggested to one of the people who attended the brunch that it might be a good idea to have the policeman drop into our brunch sometime to extend our sense of community and include our local constable. Looking back, I can't believe how naive I was. The person whose advice I sought, thankfully, patiently, explained to me that that would not be a good idea, that most of the people attending the brunch would not feel comfortable with a policeman in the room. In essence, I was told this isn't Sesame Street. And if I wanted to continue to serve meals to disadvantaged people from the neighborhood, I should drop that idea. See, I see the police through a kind of rose-colored glasses that the privileged get to wear. Now here's some background on how we got to this point, where the Halifax Board of Police Commissioners have officially created a defunding committee to define what that term means. If you go to the Halifax City municipal website and search defunding, you'll get a series of slides describing the work of the committee. And the roots of this movement go deep into the past. Studies of policing have been going on probably for decades. I know for decades for sure. But the roots of this particular movement probably started in May of last year, when an unarmed black man named George Floyd was killed in the custody of police in Minneapolis. We live in a global village now, and I think that's a good thing. And that event sparked angry reaction around the world. It was a tipping point, following a seemingly unending string of deaths of people of color at the hands of police. At the time of that killing, the city of Halifax had just approved the purchase of an armored vehicle for the police at a cost of, I believe, $300,000. I put a picture of it on the cover of the order of service for today. It's kind of symbolic. So shortly after the killing of George Floyd, the city council reversed their decision and moved to use the funds and added some additional funds to support a number of initiatives in the fight against anti-black racism in Halifax. The issue of defunding the police was taken up by the Board of Police Commissioners. And in their meeting, they were unable to agree on what the term meant in the context of Halifax. So they did what good committees do. They established another committee to help define the term. And this committee is being led by local poet, professor, and activist L. Jones. And so we now have a committee led by L. Jones that will be holding public hearings with the goal of completing a report by the summer of this year, which is a very ambitious timeline. But now we have a significant discussion in the community that involves very practical questions of social justice. This morning I asked, do we as Unitarian Universalists have anything important to add to that discussion? The issues raised by the concept of defunding the police are not fundamentally issues of racial injustice. The poor and the homeless and the disadvantaged of all ethnic backgrounds have issues with current policing and the way it's done. That said, the activist voices of the black community get our attention and provide an entry point into a discussion that might not happen otherwise. And I'm grateful that this committee is now doing its work. Our Unitarian Universalist faith tradition has a long and somewhat ignoble history related to listening to people of color. And this is primarily in the United States. But in 2017, the Unitarian Universalist Association in the United States was literally rocked to its core when issues of white supremacy were forcibly brought to the attention of leadership. People of color who had been in the movement for years and decades were fed up and tired with the way that the organization was being run by largely a group of white individuals. Members of the faith tradition who were people of color rebelled at the old way of doing business that favored the white majority. In the past 3 years, the leadership in the United States of the UUA in the United States has changed dramatically. And they're acknowledging that they've been tone deaf to the concerns of and the complaints of people of color within our denomination. The effect of that revolution, and it is a revolution, is just now being felt in Canada. I'm participating in a number of workshops with Canadian ministers around issues of diversity and inclusion. I'm finding that the hardest part of that work is learning how to listen, how to think outside the box. So as a faith tradition, we are particularly focused on listening and responding to the voices from the marginalized communities. I'm very proud of that. Our principles, of course, speak to these issues. We pay attention to them. Our first principle is the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Maybe there's an important place for recognizing that in all policing. Not to overstate the point. But that idea of police enforcing the law through intimidation comes up so often that you don't argue with the police because they have the ultimate power to arrest, to use force if necessary, to incarcerate, at least on the short term. And when you see some of these interactions between police, and these are the interactions that draw attention, I recognize that there are many, many much more appropriate interactions going on every day. But the ones that make the headlines are one where clearly the inherent worth and dignity of the person being confronted is not being respected. Our second principle is justice, equity, and compassion in all human relations. How is that reflected in the current state of policing? We should also be drawing on our resources, on our sources, in relation to these issues. At the core of the tradition are the teachings that call us to love our neighbor as ourselves, and humanist teachings that counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science. In that regard, our social scientists have been telling us that investing in preventing the social problems that lead to crime would be much more cost-effective than investing in continued intimidation and incarceration. I'm not suggesting that everything happening in policing and the criminal justice system is wrong. Far from it. There are many beautiful innovations in recent years that need to be expanded. The use of the restorative justice approach and the expansion of our wellness courts, formerly called mental health courts, are clearly more compassionate models for policing and for justice. And I think we're moving away from the idea of a war on drugs toward a model of treatment and compassion for addicts. And so we've already begun this process of defunding the police in some ways. The traditional justice system is being defunded in important ways, and we're shifting resources to a more supportive model. Before I conclude my remarks, Jessica has selected a wonderfully appropriate piece for the interlude. The song lyrics explore the belief that government has failed the people and sends a message about those who feel unheard and forgotten. Jessica.
I'm very excited to play this piece for you. Some of you may know it. Please sing along if you do at home. We are searchlights we can see in the dark. We are rockets pointing up at the stars. We are billions of beautiful hearts. And you sold us down the river too far. What about us? What about all the times you said you had the answers? What about us? What about all the broken happy ever afters? Oh, what about us? What about all the plans you ended in disaster? Oh, what about love? What about trust? What about us? We are problems that want to be solved. We are children that need to be loved. We are willing, we came when you called. But man, you fooled us, enough is enough. Oh, all the times you said you had the answers? Oh, what about us? What about all the broken happy ever afters? Oh, what about us? What about all the plans that ended in disaster? Oh, what about love? Oh, what about trust? What about us? Oh, what about us? What about all the plans that ended in disaster? Oh, what about love? What about trust? What about love? Sticks and stones, they may break these bones, but then I'll be ready. Are you ready? It's the start of us waking up. Come on, are you ready? I'll be ready. I don't want control, I want to let go. Are you ready? I'll be ready, 'cause now it's time to let them know we're ready. Yeah, what about us? What about all the times you said you had the answer? Oh, what about us? What about all the broken happy ever after? Oh, what about us? What about all the plans that ended in disaster? Oh, what about love? What about trust? What about us? Oh, what about love? What about trust? What about us?
Oh, thank you. Some concluding remarks. Many of us in the UU faith tradition are finally recognizing the privileged position that we hold in society by virtue of our ethnic heritage. The question is now, what will we do with that privilege? Shall we use it to promote our own safety and security in the short term? Or shall we take the long-term compassionate view that is the basis of the religious faith that we profess? Our congregation is just now in the process of forming a task team to explore dismantling anti-black racism in its many subtle and not so subtle forms. The question of defunding the police will undoubtedly be part of our challenge in that regard. The first meeting of this task team will be Tuesday next week in the evening at 7:30 p.m. And I'll be sending out an invitation to anyone who would like to participate on UU Info. Anyone who would like to participate is welcome to join in. We have a couple of people who we're considering working with for some workshops and Sunday services in the future, and it's our chance to sort of talk to them about their approach and plan what we would like to do going forward. So you're welcome to attend that call and just listen in if you like, or participate to the extent that you feel comfortable. So I hope that my comments this morning have sparked your imagination, maybe got you thinking outside of the box a little bit. It's a huge topic, and I cannot do it justice in one service. But I do hope that our congregation will engage our prophetic voice and our imagination and participate in the public meetings that will be coming up shortly, those arranged by L. Jones and her committee. May it be so. Amen. Now for the closing hymn. We are building a new way.
We are building a new way. are building a new way. We are building a new way. We are building a new way. Feeling stronger every day. We are building a new way. We are working to be free. We are working to be free. We are working to be free. Hate and greed and jealousy. We are working to be free. We can feed our every need. 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 Start with love, that is the seed. We can feed. Come on, Norm, help me. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom is our cry. Without these words we'll die. Peace and freedom is our cry. We are building a new way. We are building a new way.
Our chalice extinguishing words are a quote from Margaret J. Wheatley, who is a management consultant. In this new world, you and I make it up as we go along, not because we lack expertise or planning skills, but because that is the nature of reality. Reality changes shape and meaning because of our activity, and it is constantly new. We are required to be there as active participants. It can't happen without us, and nobody can do it for us. Thank you all, those who attended the service today here in the sanctuary. Thank you for coming, or on Zoom or by YouTube. I say goodbye now to those who joined us on YouTube as we end our live streaming. And for those who are on Zoom, we'll see you in a minute. Thanks again, and go in peace.